coming! There's too many of them! God damn.
I'm at a loss for words because starting this video terrifies me slightly. I've wanted to cover Alan Wake since I rebooted this channel in 2020. The game is among my favorites of its era. Alan Wake is one of those games that serves as a cultural touchstone for the time in which it was created. If one wants to experience 2010 through video games, I would say this is one of the best examples from that time. But trying to review Alan Wake is complicated. Doing so, I have to acknowledge the wider Remedyverse, or Remedy Hole as I like to describe it. Every game created by Finnish developer Remedy Entertainment is narratively and referentially dense. Not to mention how meta these games can be with themselves. One of the best examples is how the story of Max Payne is practically a series of novels by the titular writer Alan Wake. Unfortunately for Alan, his creativity has gotten out of hand. While on vacation to scenic Bright Falls, Alan Wake loses his wife and a week of his life. He awakens from the aftermath of a car crash. Soon after, he discovers parts of a manuscript he does not remember writing. Worst of all, it is coming true in front of his eyes. Darkness surrounds Alan. It is thick, tangible. Something is out there in the bushes, rustling about. Wake's only defense against the dark arts is his trusty flashlight. And that's just the premise. Alan Wake was released May 14th, 2010, but our story begins much earlier. After crunching out Max Payne 2 at the end of 2003, the team at Remedy took a much-needed break before deciding on their next project. For this segment, I'll be paraphrasing parts of a Ars Technica War Stories episode with Sam Lake, Remedy creative director and Alan Wake writer. I'm also using the breadth of content available to view in the game's free bonus materials DLC. I'm talking demos, documentaries, comics, musical score sheets, and even the original screenplay for the game and DLC episodes are included. Some handy Alan Wake American Nightmare extras are there too. According to Lake, the team wanted to do a less linear kind of game after Max Payne, to the point that Alan Wake was originally an open-world game with a day-night cycle. It would have been a survival-focused experience with the player gathering supplies during the day to fend off the hordes of darkness at night. Many of these original concepts sounded really interesting. Only problem is that the team was having a hard time making everything cohesive. The story of a small town and the concept of an open-ish world did not lend itself to the kind of story the writers, Lake particularly, wanted to tell. Despite this, the team managed to land a publisher with Microsoft Game Studios in 2006. Missing milestones, and after a cumulative 3 years of development, Remedy needed to refocus. Being Finns, a sauna of lead developers was created, locked in a room, and told to make the hard decisions. A paska ton of work was already done, so it was down to cutting the least amount to make it all fit cohesively together. The best solution was to turn the game into a linear action experience. One that would use the open world map that they had created as templates for levels and locations. A rather creative way of avoiding wasted work. As the game began to form, there was the desire to release Alan Wake in an episodic format. The structure of the game itself is that of a TV show with narrative cliffhangers at the end of each episode. Sometimes literally. The episodic nature lends itself to natural stopping points for the player. Hence, recap sequences are included at the start of each episode. Episodes themselves typically last around 1 to 2 hours. The DLC for Alan Wake also keeps this thematic naming scheme by calling themselves specials. Despite these qualities, Microsoft preferred a full retail release. Interestingly, Phil Spencer would later state that this was probably a bad decision at the time. They were worried about diminishing returns on an episodic model. Instead, they should have been embracing monetization dexterity, as it will lead to the best creativity. Basically, Telltale's Walking Dead released in an episodic format 2 years post Alan Wake and took Microsoft's lunch money. It also happened to fuel the Telltale bubble and prove Microsoft's diminishing returns fears were validated. Another interesting move by Microsoft was in regards to the PC version of the game. Despite earlier PC demonstrations, it was announced in 2009 that Alan Wake would be an Xbox 360 exclusive. Some Microsoft exec must have assumed that Alan Wake was going to move 360s. Thankfully, Remedy would later secure the rights to publish a PC version, which is the one I am playing. Shoutouts to Nitro Games for creating a decent port during a time notorious for poor PC ports. There also exists a remastered version available on the Epic Games Store and all major consoles. The remaster updated assets, cutscenes, added references to later games, and removed the ridiculous amount of product placement in Alan Wake. The devs say they wanted the world to feel more real with their product placement, but honestly, I bet Verizon made a hell of a deal with Microsoft to include a full 30-second video ad semi-hidden in the game.
Verizon Wireless has you covered. Check out the latest games. Discover new music and old favorites. Social networking, sports scores, news. It's all at your fingertips.
Although Alan Wake released in May of 2010, the game was effectively finished in August of 2009. The last 8 months of dev before going gold were polishing Alan Wake into the masterful experience it is today. Unfortunately for Remedy, sales of Alan Wake were not very strong on release. See, Alan Wake had to contend with an underground title called Red Dead Redemption, which released on the same day in North America. 2 weeks post-release, Red Dead had sold over 1.5 million copies, and Alan Wake struggled to achieve 145,000. Good thing word of mouth is one of the strongest indicators of long-term sales in gaming. Alan Wake would pull a Dead Space and sell over 1 million copies by December 2011. Interestingly, Alan Wake was one of the most pirated Xbox 360 games of its era with a whopping 1.1 million downloads in 2010. The pirated version even features Alan wearing an eye patch for the entirety of the game. He is punished Wake. The last figure I could find is a franchise total figure at 4.5 million units. It should be noted that this figure does not include Alan Wake 2, but does include the mid-quill Alan Wake American Nightmares, a game that is short enough for me to justify stapling a quick review of it at the end of this video, unlike the AWE DLC for Control, which heavily features the events of Alan Wake. That's technically a part of Control, and I have future plans for that game. I will also not be covering the novel written by this guy Alan meets in a dream at the beginning of the game and is otherwise an inconsequential figure to the plot. The novel's contents are considered canon along with the tie-in comics. Anyway, it's time to talk about the main course before we get to dessert. Visually, Alan Wake has the hallmarks of a 7th gen title aiming for realism. The lighting is absolutely fantastic. On top of dynamic lighting, a lot of care was put into making the nighttime environments feel threatening despite their otherwise normal veneer. The simple act of flipping a light switch can change the entire dynamic of a room in an instant. Not to mention a flare in combat. Enemies are draped in shadows that are cast off by light. I especially love the particle effects used here. It brings home the idea that the shadows are being burned away. Fantastic lighting helps to tie Alan Wake's themes together while improving the world of Bright Falls. Over a decade later, many of these environments and vistas are exceedingly good looking. I found myself occasionally just looking around at the world. You'll travel to many mundane but strange places in the town of Bright Falls. Anderson Farm is perhaps my favorite for obvious reasons. However, these great qualities come at a price. For starters is the uncanny valley in which many of these character models reside. These models are on the higher end of the 7th gen and they still bother me to a degree. Their faces are close to human, but lack any of the real detail needed to appear human. Nothing on a person reacts to character movements and everyone's hair is made of unmoving plastic. I'm nitpicking and honestly it's not even the fault of Remedy. These are the results of consoles that were fairly underpowered on launch and mostly outdated by the 4th year of their life cycle. But I can blame Remedy for choosing to use pre-rendered cutscenes using game assets. Cutscenes look objectively worse than gameplay as a result. A bad decision doesn't ruin the content of these cutscenes, but it does harm the cohesiveness of the presentation. Another major visual hiccup of Alan Wake is the darkness filter. Occasionally while wandering around in the dark, Alan's surroundings will become hazy and unclear. Now I understand the decision making behind it. From a thematic standpoint, this is great. It drives home to the player that the darkness is a tangible living being. But that blur makes it rather difficult to navigate and generally see anything. Truthfully, I could have done without this effect or a lessened version and received much of the same thematic impact. A last fun part of the visual presentation are the random QR codes the player will find on walls. These will lead to things like the Alan Wake Facebook page, this great gif of Sam Lake, and even bits of text. Alan Wake's visual presentation can be a bit iffy, but the game's sound helps to drive everything home. During the day, ambient noises of the surrounding forest and town can be heard. The music is pleasantly inviting you in. But then darkness falls. The music stops. The ambient sound of the forest disappears. What remains are footsteps, the wind through the trees, and the whispers of darkness. Eventually, the music will kick back in, only for it to be of a much more sinister variety. Like whispers of something incomprehensible clawing at your brain. Whenever you spot an enemy or supernatural occurrence, a stinger will play. The demonic cawing of dark ravens and the mad rambling of Taken help to unsettle the player as well. On a lighter note, Alan Wake also features the real Finnish rock band Poets of the Fall playing as the in-game band The Old Gods of Asgard for musical sections. Saying anything else on the matter is for those who like spoilers. But beyond Poets of the Fall, there's a large amount of licensed music in Alan Wake. Said music actually caused a bit of an issue in 2017 when the licensing expired. Alan Wake was actually pulled from digital and physical stores for a brief period of time. Thankfully, Microsoft aided Remedy in renewing said music license. And honestly, it's worth it. Ending your game with David Bowie's Space Oddity is a mood. The voice acting on display can really set Alan Wake apart from its contemporaries. Matthew Peretta knocks it out of the park as Alan Wake.
Waking up in the crashed car felt like I had woken from one nightmare and entered another. I couldn't remember how I got there. All I knew was that something terrible had happened to Alice.
But Fred Berman wins my heart with his rendition of Barry Wheeler, literary agent extraordinaire.
Hey, nobody move. Get your hands off of my client.
Who are you?
I'm Barry Wheeler, his agent. If you have business with Mr. Wake, you talk to me. You yokels won't know what hit you once I sick my lawyers on your asses.
Elsewise, I cannot think of a single voice actor in Alan Wake who doesn't do a fantastic job. Even the one-off characters like the town doctor or trailer park owner nail their roles. There are occasional strange reads, but I assume it's Remedy trying to allude to some other piece of media. Okay. I'm not going to be able to go much further without delving into how Alan Wake wears its influences on its sleeve. The game's setting and episodic format are indicative of the creator's love for Twin Peaks. During dev, a team from Remedy visited North Bend, Oregon, where Twin Peaks was filmed. They were traveling the Pacific Northwest to take thousands of photos and get an understanding of the area. Specific films and filmmakers are referred to as well, such as this cutscene where Taken puts an axe through a door, straight from Kubrick's The Shining. Flocks of birds attacking Wake are eerily reminiscent of Hitchcock's The Birds. And of course, I cannot forget Stephen King. King serves as an inspiration for Alan Wake the character. He's even quoted in the first line of the game. I think my favorite factoid about Alan Wake is about this quote. Someone asked King for permission to use the quote, to which he agreed. As thanks, Remedy sent him copies of the game to play. Unfortunately, King, who was 62 at the time, did not own an Xbox. Like, yeah, of course the old man doesn't have a video game machine. I would be surprised if King actually owned a computer instead of a well-worn typewriter in his study. What are perhaps my favorite bits are the Night Springs episodes. These are a goofy take on the Twilight Zone using live action footage of developers on a shitty in-game CRT TV. At one point, they made an in-universe talk show that included Sam Lake, the face model of Max Payne. The sheer amount of individual references makes it impossible for me to catalog in this video. I've included a few, whether on purpose or by accident. See if you spot any. From a gameplay standpoint, Alan Wake is a fairly minimalistic third-person shooter, especially when compared to its direct predecessor, Max Payne. There's no slow-motion action diving in Alan Wake, though the flare gun in slow-mo is just as satisfying. Due to its subject nature, I would argue that Alan Wake is more of an action horror game with emphasis on the action. The horror comes from the game's setting and premise, but the moment-to-moment gameplay is very action-oriented. Each level is its own self-contained episode with a daytime portion and a nighttime portion. These moments of daylight help to relieve the tension of the night and vary the pacing of gameplay. Plus, it may develop in ways the player never expected. What may start as a friendly visit to a trailer park can turn into a police chase through the haunted woods. Normally, there will be some overarching objective that Alan is trying to make his way toward. It may be a gas station or the local radio station. These places serve as an island of normalcy in an otherwise ocean of darkness. a darkness that is malevolent and out to stop Wake. Its main methods of doing so are through what Alan dubs as the Taken. Taken are human beings who have been consumed by the darkness. They come in several different sizes with different health values per size. What's fascinating too is how the Taken will try and surround Alan if possible. The speedy guys are constantly flanking the player while the ones throwing axes are drawing attention. Objects that have been thrown or swung at Alan can be dodged with a button, but the timing can take some getting used to. Each of these enemies is coated in a layer of darkness. They are functionally invulnerable as long as they remain shrouded in it. Darkness can be burned away with a handy flashlight, but it permeates through every cell in their body. Those who have been touched by darkness often lose themselves to it. Best thing to do for them is to put them down. Same goes for the birds. Crows will attack Alan throughout the game. Thankfully, you do not need to expend ammunition or batteries to chase them away. A murder of crows will not approach as long as a light is shining toward them. To get around this, there will be a second murder waiting in the wings to strike. Best thing to do is to keep your head on a swivel when birdwatching. The last major enemy type encountered are the poltergeists. Darkness will occasionally inhabit various objects around the world. Objects infused with darkness have a tendency to fling themselves at the closest untouched human. There is no size limitation as to what the darkness can fling either, so prepare yourself for things to randomly drop out of the sky sometimes. Thankfully, these objects are the easiest enemies to deal with as you only have to point a flashlight at them. However, this was the type of enemy that most often killed me. That is because Remedy knows how weak poltergeists can be, so they construct encounters where you must fight multiple objects at once. My ability to dodge poltergeists seems to stem from the size of the object, hence why I tend to focus on larger objects unless I can get them caught on some piece of terrain. The weapons Alan has to fight the darkness are the kinds of things one would find in small-town America. Hunting rifles, revolvers, and double-barreled shotguns. But these weapons are only effective at finishing off the Taken. Alan Wake's true weapons of war are those that give off light. I'm talking flashlights, emergency flares, and flashbangs. Flashlights can be focused on the enemy to burn away the darkness. Doing so will reduce the charge of the flashlight, weakening the beam. If the charge runs out, the player must wait or insert a new battery into the flashlight. Said batteries can be found throughout Bright Falls thanks to the lady with the light. Additionally, enemies will be momentarily stunned by focusing the flashlight. This can be abused in your favor to buy time for reloading or distance. Interestingly, for most enemies you do not have to focus the beam. You can simply hold the beam on them for a longer period of time to remove the darkness, a feature that sadly does not carry forward to American Nightmares. Flashlights range from small handhelds to heavy-duty hand lanterns. The more powerful the beam, the less time you'll have to focus it on an enemy. This slowly closing circle is representative of how much more light the player must shine on the enemy. It's a really cool way to integrate a HUD element into the gameplay itself. It just looks like a normal lens flare at first until the player notices the pattern. The flashlight serves as the player's main reticule for aiming. None of the shots necessarily need to be precise, but you do need to actually aim at an enemy to hit them. The other two weapons of light are one-use consumables. Flares will drive enemies back, creating temporary safe zones. Flashbangs are great for clearing out large groups of enemies. I never ran out of either, and honestly, I had too many flares at one point. 20 flares is very generous. Driving is an aspect of this game that is surprisingly present throughout most episodes. I assume this is a holdover from the time when Alan Wake was going to be an open world game. They help make level traversal somewhat easier. The jagged unevenness of the terrain prevents any kind of off-roading sadly, but you can make some sweet drifts. Vehicle headlights are great for stunning Taken and their weight for crushing, but be careful because cars have hidden health bars. On the unfortunate side of driving is the camera. As long as you do not touch the right stick while you're driving, you'll be fine. But be prepared for a visual nightmare if you do. I think one of my favorite bits of immersion that gets some understandable hate is how little Alan can run. Wake is not some kind of super soldier. He's a writer. Of course he can't run more than 25 feet. He can barely jump. I doubt the guy has ever been inside a gym before. It makes sense when combined with the heaviness of the movement controls. It often feels like my character actually has momentum and needs to work against it when changing direction. On the note of immersion, I want to say how strange it feels in a linear action game circa 2010 to be able to open so many doors in the game. In this era, many linear action games refuse to give the player that level of interactivity in favor of complex scripted sequences and set pieces. My mind always drifts back to this gif of Battlefield 3, where the NPCs phase through the closed door to the dismay of the player. Now, to get to my complaints for Alan Wake. Thankfully, they are mostly of the nitpicking variety. For instance, I'm mildly annoyed that my inventory is constantly being reset. Wake is falling off cliffs, out of a helicopter, and into the iron cuffs of the law. Whenever something mildly goes wrong, Alan seems to drop everything he had on him. He needs deeper pockets in that tweed jacket. For a complaint with substance, well, the enemy spawning and despawning triggers can be easily abused. Islands of Light often serve as checkpoints as well as places where your health will be restored. I haven't mentioned the health system up until now because beyond this detail, there is not much I can say. It's a health bar that will regenerate to a certain percentage before stopping. Anyway, by running into these circles of light, the player is able to despawn any enemies that have been attacking them. A surprising number of encounters can be completely ignored if the player notices these conditions and abuses them. I'll mention the coffee thermoses in passing. I don't care much about video game collectibles. Not since I gathered 100 feathers in Assassin's Creed 2 and all I got was this cutscene about my sad mom. Of all the aspects to Alan Wake, the story is absolutely going to be the part of the game that keeps you playing. As I mentioned before, it is a rather unique premise where a writer's manuscript is coming true in front of him. Only he doesn't remember writing a word of it. Said manuscript is a story called Departure whose pages can be found in the game world. They are all horribly out of order, but they provide foreshadowing and context for many events throughout the game. You'll even get insight into the Dark Presence at times. The journey is such a whirlwind of activity that it takes me places I would have never expected upon first impression. Including my absolute favorite, a metal band stage where you must fight off waves of Taken. Many of the characters encountered throughout the game feel like real people. Everyone has their motivations, quirks, and thoughts about the situation. Sheriff Baker wants to keep her town from falling apart. Agent Nightingale has a rather large repertoire of literary references. Doc Nelson just wants to fish. Perhaps my favorite characters are a tie between the Anderson brothers and Barry Wheeler. To explain why will involve a heavy dose of spoilers. Before going there, I do want to mention the insane amount of supplementary content there is for Alan Wake. I know I've already mentioned it before, but I'm talking about comic books, a novel written by an in-game character, and a live-action miniseries prequel. I literally don't have time to discuss most of it, but I highly recommend that you take a look at some of these if the Alan Wake pit has sparked your interest. If you want to avoid spoilers for Alan Wake, go here. As with many a good story, this one begins with a dream. One of vehicular manslaughter. Or is it? Because when our protagonist goes to check his victim, they have vanished. A few steps later, the stranger appears once more to chase Alan to a lighthouse. All the while, the mysterious light provides guidance. Alan Wake is awoken from his nightmare by his wife, Alice. They are on a barge to quaint Bright Falls. Alan has been suffering writer's block since finishing his last novel. It has sent Alan into a self-doubt spiral. Alice has prepared this trip as a way to get away from everything and to ignore writing for just a bit. Wake takes time to stretch his legs and attempt small talk with his fellow passengers. One is a grumpy Gus who snidely comments about city folk. The other is the welcoming Pat Main. He is the nightly radio host for 97.6 KBF RM, Bright Falls Radio. Pat is a fan of Wake's work, but promises to keep his presence in town on the down low. He insists that the Wakes join the annual Deer Fest in 2 weeks' time. Exiting the ferry, Alan approaches a local diner to find a Mr. Carl Stuckey. On top of running a gas station, Stuckey rents out cabins to out-of-towners. Apparently it's good business. Inside the diner are a cast of characters who Wake will be interacting with during his time in Bright Falls. Rose, the waitress, has a fangirl moment in his presence. Not surprising, especially considering she keeps a cardboard cutout of Wake in the diner entrance. When Wake asks where Stuckey is, Rose responds that he's in the bathroom. Old Rusty the Forest Ranger invites Wake to enjoy a cup of coffee at the bar. He is hopelessly in love with the budding Rose, but never knows when to quit. The Anderson brothers occupying the corner booth are a peculiar pair. Two old metalheads by the name of Tor and Odin who led a band called the Old Gods of Asgard in the 70s. Tragically, the band was short-lived. As explained on the band's website, Bassist Fat Bob Boulder passed away from leukemia while recording their 7th album in 1980. The music had lost its magic for the brothers, and they decided it was best to retire to a farm in Bright Falls. The Rockers have aged considerably since. Now in their 70s, the brothers are cared for by Dr. Emil Hartman at his clinic in the old Cauldron Lake Lodge. But from time to time, they manage to escape the lodge and wander the town, causing their own version of trouble, like continually playing the Lime and the Coconut song on the diner jukebox to everyone's chagrin, including Tor. But none of these characters are as odd as the unnamed lady clutching an oil lantern, muttering to herself about the dangers of the dark. As Alan looks for the bathroom, she warns him not to go into the dark. You could hurt yourself there. Alan ignores sound advice and proceeds into the darkness. He is unable to find Stucky, but is assisted by a woman shrouded in darkness. She gives Alan keys and directions to his cabin on Cauldron Lake. The woman says she will stop by later to check in on the couple. Alan and Alice take to the road. Unnoticed by either Wake, Carl Stucky barrels out of the diner. He half-heartedly attempts to follow the Wakes to give them their actual cabin key. At the cabin on Cauldron Lake, the Wakes have begun to settle in. Alan is happy for a place where he may be able to forget his work for a moment. Alice's intense fear of the dark rears its head when the generator fails. While fixing it, Alan overhears Rose announcing to the whole town via radio that Alan Wake is there. So much for anonymity. Alice has a surprise in store for Alan. He assumes that it is the lack of pants on his wife. Instead, it is the worn typewriter in the cabin study. This whole trip was Alice's way of getting Alan away from the world to write in peace. But Alan is understandably unhappy about the deception. He storms out of the cabin in anger. She won't follow. Night has fallen. The darkness has become empowered. It extinguishes all light inside the cabin. Alice is attacked, dragged into the lake by some unseen force. Alan dives in after her. Alan Wake awakens in the aftermath of a car accident. He has no memory of the last week. Alan knows something has happened to Alice, something dreadful. But Alan needs help now. He will have to worry about Alice once he was okay. Alan spies a gas station in the distance. That'll be his goal. While traveling through the dark forest, Alan finds pages of a manuscript he does not remember writing. It's good stuff, only it seems a bit too on point for Alan's liking. Especially once Alan enters a lumber mill to find taken Carl Stucky pulling an axe from his victim. One Stanley Kubrick's The Shining reference later, and Alan obtains his most important weapon, the Holy Hand flashlight. Fully armed, Alan is ready to face Taken Stucky. Once defeated, Stucky's body vanishes in shadow, leaving no trace of the horror. At the gas station, Alan finds a phone and gets through to the local sheriff's office. Sheriff Breaker arrives not long after to find a very disoriented Wake. Those low gas prices might be the cause, or the head wound. The sheriff takes Alan back to his cabin, only for there to be no trace of his existence. It's as if it's disappeared beneath the waves. Which, according to Sheriff Breaker, is what happened when the volcano erupted back in the 1970s. And that's just the first episode of 6. This is what I mean when I say Alan Wake is narratively dense. I just did the best I could to give a concise summary of the events, and it took over 1,000 words to do so. Anyway, here's the next 5 episodes. Episode 2 begins with a flashback to Wake's apartment in New York, 3 years prior. Alan's latest work, Sudden Stop, was coming to shelves soon. Alice was fussing over some promotional shots she took of Alan. A power outage hits, re-establishing Alice's fear of the dark. To assuage her fears, Alan lights some candles and tells her the story of the clicker. It was an old light switch his mother had given him. According to her, a flip of the switch and a magic light would scare the monsters away. In the present, the town doctor gives Alan a once-over at the sheriff's office. Before Sheriff Breaker can ask Alan any pertinent questions, he receives a mysterious call. He'll find proof of his wife's kidnapping out back. The kidnapper tells Alan to meet him tonight at Lover's Peak in Elderwood National Forest. On his way to find proof, Alan encounters the woman with the oil lamp once more. This is Cynthia Weaver, town eccentric. She makes sure every building's lights are functional. Stopping by a radio, Alan can hear deputies Mulligan and Thornton, 2 unseen goofballs who have their own adventures following behind Alan's messes. And the drunk tank is Walter. He seems to be having a rough go of it after an altercation with his buddy Danny. According to Walter though, he wasn't drunk, and Danny was some kind of space alien. Or something. Best to leave him rambling in his cell. Out back, Wake finds Alice's driver's license in a rusted out car. This is no prank. Wake goes back inside to find the sheriff talking with Dr. Emil Hartman. He's a therapist who specializes in assisting creatives overcome their creative blockages. Hartman had convinced Alice to bring Alan to Bright Falls as a means to help him. Alan does not take Hartman's presence well. His punch breaks Hartman's nose. Just then, Barry Wheeler, literary agent extraordinaire, makes his red puffy coat / Hawaiian shirt combo entrance. He extracts Alan from the situation into the Barry Mobile, a yellow H1 Hummer. Barry can be frivolous with his money. SOB's got like 10 miles to the gallon. Barry also mentions that nobody needs a replay of the paparazzi thing, implying a checkered past for Alan. On the way to Elderwood National Forest, Alan explains everything he knows. Barry has a very hard time believing anything beyond Alice's kidnapping. He's wondering what Alan has consumed. Alan talks to Rusty, whom is taking care of a very good boy who stepped into bear trout. One registration form later and a cabin is secured. The only thing Alan can do now is wait. With darkness having fallen, Alan wanders into the night, ordering Barry to lock the door behind him. As Alan makes his way toward the visitor center, he hears gunshots, Rusty's cries, and terrible noises. Alan finds Rusty 10 different ways of messed up. The best thing for Alan to do is to get the lights back on and create a safe zone of light. Unfortunately, some axe wielder got to the fuse box first. Rusty cries out once more as he is taken by the darkness. But Rusty does not let Alan linger in regret for long. He has an axe to grind with unruly campers. Barry calls not much later with the realization that Alan is not crazy, and that crazy things are in fact happening. Alan makes his way toward Lover's Peak, dodging Taken the whole way. An express gondola is the only way across a large ravine. Unfortunately, the bumpy nature of the express gondola causes Alan to lose his gun in the ensuing landing. Surrounded by Taken, Wake is saved by a flare from the man he came to see, the grumpy Gus from the barge into town. Seems he's had an eye on Alan since before he arrived in Bright Falls. Grumpy Gus's name is actually Mott, and he's got the gun. Alan uses his flashlight and flares to ward off the Taken. The two make a desperate stand at Lover's Peak. When the Taken seem to run out, the kidnapper and Alan have a chat. Mott wants the entire manuscript in exchange for Wake's wife. Else, he will hurt her. Alan shows off more of that violent temper by punching the kidnapper in the face and off a cliff. This time, Alan ends up with the gun, but Mott gets away. He gives Alan 2 days to hand over the full manuscript. The kidnapper is demanding something Alan does not have. At least not fully. A destitute Wake resolves to return to Barry. On the way to the cabin, Alan grabs a car, learning of their use in fighting off Taken. Unfortunately, it must be left behind not far from the cabin, where birds are terrifying Barry. Flare gun counters bird. The battle over, daybreak has arrived. Wake tries to put words to paper, but is unable to do so. Thankfully, while in town, Barry receives a call from Rose. She says she has pages of the manuscript for Alan. Barry agrees to meet in the trailer park outside of town, but the two friends are going to be in for a surprise. Old Lady Darkness is whispering sweet nothings into Rose's ear. Cue the end of episode 2. The Barry Mobile arrives at the trailer park to begin the third episode. Before entering, Alan receives a call from Sheriff Breaker. Apparently, an FBI agent is in town and wants to speak to him. Wake promises to be over soon. The two are greeted and led to Rose's trailer by the park's owner. Aside from the random boat wreck, it's a quaint community. The local food trailer sells a big dog for $3.49. On the walk, Alan and Barry discuss what the latter discovered in the town archives. Strange disappearances, mysterious deaths, legends coming to life. All centered around Cauldron Lake. Supposedly, a poet by the name of Thomas Zane owned the island Alan saw. He and the island disappeared when the volcano erupted in 1970. It occurred precisely 1 week after Zane's lover, Barbara Jagger, drowned in the lake. Oddly, Barry could not find any information about Thomas Zane when he tried searching online. What is notable is that town eccentric Cynthia Weaver was the newspaper editor during those days. She was apparently very close to both Zane and Jagger. At the trailer, Rose invites the two into the darkened interior for some spiked coffee, but this is no Irish breakfast. Sleeping pills are the additive of choice for this batch. Alan awakens beneath Rose's shrine to him. He's lost a day to the darkness, a day he didn't have. Wake leaves an unconscious Barry and a catatonic Rose behind to get help. Unfortunately, it comes in the form of Special Agent Nightingale of the FBI. He approaches Wake, gun drawn, spewing hateful names like Hemingway and Spillane at him. He makes a break for it. Nightingale and the accompanying officers open fire despite the presence of the trailer park owner. Alan just makes it. Wake is pursued into the dark forest by a swarm of officers. But they are no match for Alan's stealth skills, and the darkness itself. Police cars end up flying down ravines and dark paths. A helicopter is downed by a murder of crows. Through the radios of Rex, Alan can hear the slow breakdown in trust between Sheriff Breaker and Agent Nightingale, especially considering the agent's boozy odor. The sheriff herself points out there's no way that the geek in a tweed jacket took out all her officers. By some manner of luck and willpower, Alan finds himself at the nearby radio station. He attempts to take refuge with host Pat Main when both Breaker and Nightingale arrive. The agent brandishes his weapon once more while Breaker and Main try to talk him down. Nightingale takes the shot anyway. Fortunately for everyone, he can't aim. Alan escapes into the darkness once more. Nightingale calls after Alan using H.P. Lovecraft's name like a slur. He probably wouldn't have minded. Don't look up his cat's name. Alan fights through a horde of Taken and even a possessed bulldozer to find a vehicle that'll get him to his meeting place. He travels to the old coal mining museum during the day to meet with the kidnapper. Night falls and Mott is nowhere to be seen. He calls Alan with a change of plans. They are to meet nearby at Mirror Peak. Alan will have to figure out how to get through the haunted museum and abandoned town by himself. The darkness succeeded in delaying Wake for long enough. It managed to reach the kidnapper long before he arrives. The darkness unleashes endless torture upon Mott and he spills his soul. He never had Alice. The kidnapping was a plot to get Alan to write. None of it was even Mott's idea. Alan manages to bring Mott into the light, but the darkness asserts itself with a flash of the old lady and a tornado of darkness. Alan manages to light a flare as he is pulled into the dark madness. Wake plummets into the water below, flare in hand. Episode 3 ends on a cliff drop rather than a cliffhanger. Alan awakens in unfamiliar surroundings at the beginning of episode 4. Alice's familiar face fades into Hartman's unfriendly one. According to him, Alan is having another mental break. The sedatives are to keep him calm and less punchy. Sufficiently pacified, Hartman takes Alan on a tour of Cauldron Lake Lodge. It starts in a crash course of supposed reality. Alan's had another psychotic break. Alice is dead and has been for some time now. Alan has trapped himself inside his head with delusions of darkness as his worst enemy. The words coming from Hartman's mouth sound logical, but Alan has a hard time believing them to be sincere. Not with a photo of Alice's supposed kidnapper on the wall. Something to note at the Sundial Outback. It is dedicated by Hartman to poet TZ. Hartman knows much more than he's willing to let on. Patients at the clinic include the likes of Emerson. He's wearing what appears to be a Bit Trip t-shirt and has a Death Rally poster. More importantly, the Anderson brothers make their return. While Hartman checks on something elsewhere, the Anderson brothers give Alan a clue on what to do. Calling him Tom, they tell him to visit their farm, Valhalla. There's a message they've written down in case they forgot what's important. Later, Alan attempts to write something down in his room. Visions of another typewriter in a dark room fill his mind. They cause him physical pain. Elsewhere, the Anderson brothers make their move. They cause a commotion that attracts all the orderlies. Alan finds himself drawn as well. Tor has traded his toy hammer for a real one. The nurse at his feet is alive, but injured. Alan takes this opportunity to make a break for it. He discovers Barry locked in Hartman's office, further confirming that Hartman is a conniving man. When Hartman tried to confront Alan, he threatened Hartman's life. Everything went downhill when the lights turned off. Though not the doctor's demise, Alan still felt good locking him in the dark. Wake worked through the darkened lodge, dodging poltergeists all the while. Managing to make it outside, he braved the Shining's hedge maze and scores of Taken. After reaching the other side of the property, Alan makes it to the Barrymobile. They escape from the lodge in style. Alan, Barry, and Rose's cardboard cutout of Wake. As they make their way toward the Anderson farm, disaster strikes. A boulder barreled down the mountainside, causing the Barrymobile to flip off the side of the road. Thankfully, its occupants suffered a much better fate. Having been split up in the crash, the two friends make their separate ways to Valhalla. Alan finds Walter in one of the nearby cabins. He'd been pilfering moonshine from the Anderson farm again and had another close encounter with his Taken friend Danny. Only this time, it didn't end well for poor Walter. He laments how this is
like a real bad follow-up to a real good movie where the best friend's suddenly the bad guy who wrote this crap anyway.
Speaking of moonshine, Alan finds Barry at the Anderson still. It was an impressive sight to see. If the brothers' rock career had never taken off, they could have made a killing as distillers, or as craftsmen judging by the Viking longboat stored in their barn. But the sight of their sound stage makes Alan regret all doubt about the Elder Gods. Words cannot describe the feeling of making a stand on a metal concert stage. The moment itself will have to suffice. Post-battle, the two friends take refuge in the Andersons' farmhouse. With the power on, they hear a skipping record, the Andersons' message. A record from long ago, but somehow pertinent to Wake's situation. Find the lady of the light, gone mad with the night. That's how you reshape destiny. That could be nobody else but Cynthia Weaver. Alan and Barry resolve to set out in the morning. But tonight, they celebrate with the Andersons' moonshine. Perhaps using water from Cauldron Lake was the secret to why it tasted so good. But that water also brought back every repressed memory from the night Alice disappeared. She had been dragged into the lake. Alan had dived in after her. In doing so, the dark presence touched Alan, made him its puppet. Taking the form of an aged Barbara Jagger, it made Alan write the manuscript for departure. This would be its means to escape into the world of man. Anything written in the dark place was easily capable of reshaping the fabric of reality. Alan spent a week in that place with Jagger whispering edits into his ear, slowly turning Alice's rescue into the horror story it desired. But Wake managed to write his escape into the story through the use of Thomas Zane. He still existed in the dark place even if nothing remained in the material realm. It is through his light Alan was able to escape the cabin. Zane managed to scatter the manuscript as well, but paid a terrible price. Forced deeper into the dark abyss. Alan awakens that morning full of regret, and into the custody of Agent Nightingale. Not all dangers are banished by the light. Episode 5 begins in one of the holding cells of the sheriff's office. Alan has a vision of Cynthia Weaver, talking about a key Zane left for her to protect. Barry is unbearably hungover. Nightingale is gloating over his capture of Wake and the manuscript. Sheriff Breaker just wants to talk to Nightingale's supervisor. When another splitting headache brings Alan to his knees, Sheriff Breaker checks to see if he's alright. Nightingale's callous manner causes her to lose all trust in him, not to mention the alcohol and clear lack of jurisdiction. As Nightingale attempts to regain control of the situation, he pauses mid-sentence. He's read this before. He double-checks a piece of the manuscript before the darkness drags him away. The sheriff wastes no time. She arms herself and Wake before telling Barry to call a list of numbers to alert their owners. The code word Night Springs will convince them. One of the first people Barry calls is Sheriff Breaker's father. He's a huge fan of Wake. Alan and Sheriff Breaker fight their way through the darkened streets that have been overtaken. The inside of Town Hall is relatively quiet during the search for the rescue helicopter key. Outside is a different story. Barry, having completed his task, was forced to evacuate the sheriff's office by a horde of poltergeists. The two managed to catch up with Barry past the church. By then, Barry had managed to outfit himself with Christmas light armor and an Eye of Sauron headlamp. The trio take flight to Bright Falls Light and Power, the nearby hydroelectric dam. Cynthia Weaver had made the Sammy abandoned place her home. As they arrive at the dam, the Dark Presence sends murders of crows. Wake manages to get on the ground. Barry and Sheriff Breaker resolve to provide what aerial support they can. Inside the dam, Alan comes face to face with the Lady of the Light. Cynthia Weaver has been waiting a very long time for him. All the crazy eccentricities were really ritualistic preparations for this fateful day when the light must fight in the dark. She is the one who had left behind all the caches of supplies throughout Bright Falls. And now, it is time for Alan to claim what Thomas Zane bequeathed him. Weaver has kept it locked up in the well-lit room, a place where she has ensured no darkness exists. She's even outfitted a drainage pipe with lights for a safe journey there. Unfortunately, the crows get the better of the chopper, causing it to go down. Alan abandons Weaver to make sure his friends are safe. Thankfully, the plot armor is strong with these ones. Barry and the sheriff make it inside the dam, but the dark presence prevents Alan from following. He instead climbs to the top, outrunning a tornado of darkness once there. Alan barely makes it inside. In the well-lit room is a shoebox with 2 items. One is a written page detailing a memory from Alan's childhood written by Zane. The other is the clicker, the old light switch from episode 2 that is supposed to drive away the dark, something that is supposed to be in Alice's possession. The implications of it all made Alan's mind swirl. Who wrote who? But he now knew what he must do. Thus ends episode 5 with a song by Poets of the Fall. The final episode opens with a memory of a hungover Alan Wake. An appearance on a talk show the night before ended in a rager. The following conversation with Alice cements Alan as a flawed human being rather than some kind of paragon of justice. Just a man trying to make it through the world on his written word. In the present, with the clicker secured, Alan orders his friends to stay in the well-lit room. He and Barry share a sorrowful goodbye, the kind only 2 men as close as brothers could share. Barry locks the vault behind Alan. Outside it is sunny despite the time. Alan nears Cauldron Lake when the darkness reasserts its control. He makes a quick stop at the Majestic Motel, mind the roaches. There, Alan finds Agent Nightingale's room littered with photographs and empty alcohol containers. Judging by Hartman's book and the flashbangs, Nightingale knew more about the situation than it would appear. The darkness pulls out every trick it can think to prevent Alan's approach to Cauldron Lake, throwing Taken, crows, and innumerable objects at Wake, but nothing stops him. Not even the tornado of darkness at the lake's edge can stop Wake. Standing there on the cliffside, clicker in hand, Alan does the only thing he can do now. Jump. Alan awakens in dark, but familiar surroundings. Alice is there, asking Alan to return to bed. The nightmare is over. Alan knows it has only just begun. He's in the dark place now. A flashlight banishes the creature masquerading as his wife. The clicker on the table allows him to summon Zane. The diver and the writer come face to face for the first time since Zane rescued Alan. Zane gives Alan a vague set of instructions to navigate the dark place. Don't mind the sudden twin either. That's Mr. Don't worry about him. Alan's friends will meet him later. In the dark place, words hold power. They can be used to create physical objects like shopping carts and payphones. They can even be used to conjure up places that no longer exist, like the cabin. Inside, Alan is greeted by the darkness wearing Barbara Jagger's face. It taunts Alan, declaring that he will never have his Alice back. There will be another person whose creative power will free the darkness. Alan wastes no breath. Instead, he sticks the clicker in the hole in its chest and flicks the switch. The cabin is bathed in light. Jagger disintegrates. All that was left for Alan to do was write the ending to Departure. The final page sat in the typewriter. Alan knew what he must do. There's a price for everything, and the law of equivalent exchange is in play. That was Zane's mistake with Barbara, one that Alan will not repeat. For when Alice emerges from the depths of the lake, Alan has disappeared. The citizens celebrate Deerfest, seemingly unaware of the events of the last week. Though not everyone. Rose holds an oil lantern while Agent Nightingale observes from darkness. Still writing in the dark place, Alan comes to a terrifying conclusion. It's not a lake. It's an ocean. Thus ends Alan Wake's Bright Falls arc. But this is not the end of our story. For the Dark Place arc is an additional 2 episodes created post-release. The first episode, dubbed The Signal, takes place in the surrealist version of Bright Falls, Balls Fright. The arc begins with Alan Wake walking into a distorted version of the Oh Dear Diner. Alan is falling deeper into the dark place with each passing second. Thomas Zane sends Alan a signal to guide him through the ever-changing landscape. Words would occasionally appear with their meanings made manifest if light directly touched them. One of them results in Barry. Not really Barry. More like the version of Barry that lives in Alan's head. Perhaps a bit funnier. He does his best to accompany Alan through the rest of his adventures in Balls Fright. Alan begins to encounter a frenzied version of himself through television screens. Alan adds complication and Taken to Alan's plans. Alan even uses Alan's own works against Alan, dropping them out of the sky at high speed. Flocks of Alex Casey novels buzzing about. Scores of Taken in a field of flickering light poles. Imagination is a double-edged sword in the dark place. After an arduous journey through the dark, Alan finds a small bastion of light, his home. Thomas Zane awaits him there. Zane reveals a truth to Alan. Television Alan and this Alan are one and the same. Alan has been fighting himself the whole time. He is caught in a series of nightmares. TV Alan is currently on the floor of the cabin, and this part of Alan must reunite with him to be made whole. Isaac? TVs around the apartment begin to move as Alan Vision asserts dominance. Zane is banished and a terrible battle follows. Alan appears to win before reality shifts once more. Alan now finds himself back at Cauldron Lake Lodge with an imaginary Hartman, a fate potentially worse than death. The start of the second special abandons all pretext of reality. Space actively warps around Wake. Hartman morphs into Barry and the room into the lodge's outskirts. Out front, a small soundstage has been erected. The old gods of Asgard blast from the speakers, but the music is distorted and wrong. It is a memory mockingly made manifest by the dark place. Zane appears to Alan once more. He gives Alan the remaining manuscript pages in his possession. The words on them hold great power. Enough to construct pathways between the islands of calm amidst the sea of irrationality that is the dark place. Wake found himself running through mazes and rotating buildings. All the while, he drew closer to his eventual goal, the lighthouse he had seen in the dream at the beginning of this entire journey. As Alan comes closer to the lighthouse, Zane explains more of the situation to him. TV Alan is the irrational part of Alan that has given in to the darkness and despair. This Alan is the rational part of Alan Wake that wants to regain control over the whole. He is about as real as the ground he walks upon. Zane makes an important distinction that Mr. is not Alan Wake. He is something different. Zane also mentions how he first visited Alan in the dream he had before arriving in Bright Falls, preparing Alan for what he was about to face. But something like the sit-down between TV Alan and imaginary Hartman cannot be prepared for. It can only be confronted and endured. Nothing that happens is real, but the words ring with some bitter truths. As Alan gets closer to the lighthouse, the building itself begins to aid him. Taken standing in the path of its light are vaporized in an instant. A boon that Alan cannot help but use to his advantage. Everything counts in the dark place. When he finally reaches the top of the lighthouse, Alan discovers a ladder leading even higher. This ladder ignores Euclidean space to exit near Zane's old cabin. Outside, Alan must fight his demons in order to enter. They come in the form of Hartman, the old gods of Asgard, and Barry Wheeler. 3 worthy foes who tug at Alan's heartstrings, but all defeated in time. Alan enters the cabin to find himself cowering on the floor in fits of insanity. By touching himself, the 2 Alans converge into one being. His mind clear for the first time, Alan knew that he may not survive a second encounter like that, so he resolves to write his escape with a new work called Return. Thus ends the Dark Place arc. This won't be the only piece of Alan Wake content I cover today, as there is also Alan Wake American Nightmares to consider. American Nightmares is a very different game from the outset. Alan wakes up somewhere in the Arizona desert in the town of Night Springs. Only Night Springs doesn't actually exist. It's a fictional town from the in-universe Twilight Zone-like TV series. More mysteries abound, but that's for spoilers. Visually, I will say that American Nightmare looks crisper than Alan Wake, but still has that 7th generation vibe. UI elements are cleaner, but a bit less stylized in comparison with the first game. I do like that the minimap is larger than the one in Alan Wake 2. That's 2 with 2 O's, never mind. The environments themselves are actually much more limited in scope than in Alan Wake, but that actually ties into the narrative. Honestly, I'm finding it near impossible to avoid talking about the narrative of American Nightmares because it is so intertwined with the ending of Alan Wake and its own gameplay. The soundscape's okay. I wasn't blown away by anything in particular, but there were some hiccups with the voice acting. Mainly that 2 of the 3 new characters in this game have okay voice acting, while the other sounds like this is her first voice acting role. On the gameplay side of things are the most notable changes. For one is how Alan controls. There isn't the same clunky weight that I felt with the first game. Here, Alan actually stops on a dime. It's very characteristic for the overall arcadey and dreamlike feel of American Nightmare's combat. By now, Alan is more familiar with the weaponry and it reflects it in gameplay. Reloading is often faster, recoil is more manageable, and aiming is a touch smoother. These were necessities for the new enemies that American Nightmares features. The first of which is the Splitter. Enemies that will split apart when the light shines on them. The law of equivalent exchange applies so each copy gets increasingly smaller and can only split a certain number of times. But this enemy's high health makes them a danger. Maybe not as much as the giants though. priority targets in my book. I have never been hit by them due to their slow speed and my high power weaponry, but they're incredibly intimidating. Birdmen are the most unique enemy of the game. These are enemies that will take the form of a murder of crows to launch surprise attacks. Furthermore, in crow form, they are completely invulnerable. Another priority target due to their tricky nature. Though I have to say, I love the goofy transformation animations they have. Grenadiers are the first enemies in Alan Wake to use an explosive weapon, of sorts. They are essentially the opposite of flashbangs, dark bangs. It's worth noting that their grenades can hurt other Taken, so a tricky player could leave them alive to perform friendly fire. The last enemy to talk about is also the worst. Not as in it's difficult to fight. No, these spiders are... well, just look at them. They look like a Unity store asset that has been badly rigged. Spiders barely do any damage, and the flashlight is more than powerful enough to destroy them. I think they were more of a waste of dev time than anything for this game. The arsenal in which Alan uses to annihilate the darkness has gotten an upgrade. Many of the weapons are considerably higher powered than the trusty revolver, like the Magnum. These weapons can be found locked in cases in the environment. To unlock these cases, Alan will have to gather the necessary amount of manuscript pages. It appears Alan has written a script for a Night Springs episode that is currently playing out before his eyes. Whether or not he survives is to be determined. I'm gonna have to throw up a spoiler warning for all those who want to experience Alan Wake American Nightmares. Talking about the story requires knowledge of the ending to Alan Wake. All I can say with confidence is that I was underwhelmed by the game at first before suddenly being thrown for a loop about halfway in. From there on, it was a much more enjoyable experience, but it's a shame that it took so long to get there. Anyway, here's the time code for the conclusion to avoid Alan Wake and American Nightmare spoilers. Alright, so when I say the game throws you for a loop, I mean it. Because Alan awakens amidst the wreckage of Thomas Zane's cabin in the Arizona desert. He finds himself in an oil field on the outskirts of a motel in Night Springs, a town that shouldn't exist. The only inhabitant of the motel is mechanic Emma Sloan. She's the kind who believes in crystals, so Wake doesn't stick around for long. He says condescendingly while fighting shadow monsters in a dream world that he made up himself. Instead, he finds out his antagonist is none other than himself. Actually, it's just Mr. See, while Alan has been stuck in the dark place, Mr. has been living it up in the real world using Alan's likeness to get what he wants. And what he wants is chaos. Or so it seems, because Mr.'s motives aren't well known. He will continually haunt Alan through TV screens, occasionally showing off victims. Following the instructions of a manuscript page, Alan manages to destroy an oil rig spewing darkness with a falling satellite, to the tune of Clubfoot by Caspian. After poking around the motel and the diner, Alan finds a key to the observatory, his next destination. Emma dies to Taken semi-off screen. At the observatory, Alan meets Dr. Meadows, whom had already been acquainted with Mr. He charmed his way in to view the night sky before breaking the telescope. Alan has to spend time repairing it, fixing the cooling system, and answering this strangely sexy doctor's questions. Why does she look like that? Dr. Meadows can't quite describe what she is seeing in the telescope once it is running. Printouts aren't much help either because they are just a couple of confusing sentences. At least Alan knows he must go to the nearby drive-in movie theater. At the drive-in, it appears that the 12th annual NSVA Film Festival is kicking off soon. I'm personally looking forward to Ham, a documentary, and Samurai vs. Conquistador 2, The Return of the Conquistador. I can't begin to tell you how much money I would pay to see that second film. I also can't wait to see it referenced somewhere else in a Remedy game. In the security office, Alan finds another character, Serena Valdiva, who has been touched by darkness and bad voice acting. When Alan turns on the lights, Serena is shocked to see Alan standing in front of her since he's supposed to be dead. I assume she had the same reaction with Mr. who actually makes his physical appearance at the drive-in. He's hell-bent on stopping Alan. Inside the projection booth, Alan sets up the scene according to the sentence fragments he got of the observatory. When he does, things go wrong. Darkness pours into the room. Alan is thrown for a loop again when he is physically sent back in time by Mr. Scratch to when the cabin landed in Night Springs. This was the moment when American Nightmares did a complete 180 with my expectations. I had assumed that this game was coming to a close and that this was just a short little adventure in Alan's mind. But now we've got time-traveling shenanigans involved. Best of all, the characters know it and respond accordingly. For example, Emma manages to gather all the materials needed to cause the satellite fall before Alan ever arrives. I have to commend such a genius narrative device that allowed the game to reuse assets and environments continually. The only thing really changing each time the player enters a level is their route through it and the story itself. Alan must force himself through the time loop 2 more times before he manages to gather all the fragments needed to banish Mr. The film that ends up burning him away is the one Alice created in honor of Alan, a film called Sunrise. In it, Alice and Alan come face to face at long last. They embrace in the rising sun. But whether this is something that happened, a delusion of Alan's, or a glimpse into a possible future is left unanswered. One thing is certain.
This scene takes place in another time and another place, far, far away from Night Springs.
At the end of the credits are a few lines of text. The first credits Alan Wake with writing Night Springs episode Return, the same name with the piece Alan was working on in the cabin. The second is that Alan Wake's journey through the night will continue. This has always felt like a vague promise until the AWE expansion for Control. This was a piece of DLC that inextricably tied Remedy's games together into one shared universe. Sure, there were mentions of Bright Falls in the base game, but to have Alan himself contact the FBC is a new level. As much as I want to get into it, I have to save the greater events of the Alan Wake experience for the eventual Control video. What I will touch upon is the very end of the DLC, when another character contacts Jesse Faden about news of another paranatural event detected at Bright Falls. Only the date on the alert is years into the future, paving a way for the eventual release of Alan Wake 2. A game that is so fantastic, but I can't talk about it for another couple years because of my arbitrary rules. To wrap things up, Alan Wake is a mesmerizing experience. It is among the densest narratives I have seen in video games, let alone media. The very structure of the game lends it an acclaimed miniseries feel. Alan Wake sets up high expectations and manages to deliver upon them. As with anything in this world, there's a hiccup or two, but nothing inexcusable or outright game-breaking. The story is among the very best I have played in video games. Alan Wake is one of those video games that manages to undeniably transcend its medium into interactive art. If you want an experience that can't quite be replicated elsewhere, I highly recommend Alan Wake. If you want a fun third-person shooter, I would recommend Alan Wake. About the only people I cannot recommend Alan Wake are those who value visual fidelity over all, and those wholly uninterested in a good narrative. Alan Wake can be bought in its remastered form only on the Epic Games Store, but can be found in its crunchy original look on Steam, GOG, and EGS for cheaper. American Nightmares is also available for a paltry $9. Thanks for watching. Originally, there was a joke here about diving right into Rapture after my waking nightmare. While I do eventually want to go through Bioshock, over the course of this project, I've had some time to self-reflect. The J-Files videos are becoming ridiculously long, the process of making them is even longer, and they're starting to focus too much on acclaimed titles. For the foreseeable future, J-Files is about to take a hard right turn into Jank City. Buckle up, the barrel needs scraping. Short-form quote-unquote filler videos will stick around because I like making those and I have a script or two waiting in the wings. Anyways, I appreciate you for making it this far and listening to me ramble on. I hope you've enjoyed the journey to get here and that you stick around for what the future might bring. Thanks again. More garbage to come.
When you spend most of your night running uphill while the crazy bunch of demon hicks try to take your head off with an axe, you know your helicopter crash landed in Night Springs.